If you love horror stories, real-life mysteries, and supernatural events, then this channel is for you. Subscribe to the channel now and enjoy chilling paranormal stories. Now, let's move on to the next shocking incident. Teluk Bungkal was not a familiar name. This small village was hidden deep within the swampy jungles of East Kalimantan, isolated from the noise of the outside world. The only access road was muddy and turned into slippery sludge during the rains. But for the Darmawan family, this village was meant to be a new beginning. Darmawan, a civil engineer from Java, was transferred to Teluk Bungkal to lead a bridge construction project that would connect the village to the nearby city. He was accompanied by his wife Lestari, who was 7 months pregnant at the time. They arrived in the village during the middle of the rainy season. While the locals welcomed them politely, there was a strange coldness in the air. No one smiled, and no one invited them into longer conversations. Even the village chief, Pak Muksin, only said briefly, "Take good care of your wife and child, Pak Darmawan." The nights here are not kind. Lestari had a feeling that something was not right about the place. Their rented house was near the swamp, surrounded by tall trees whose leaves rustled slowly at night, as if someone was whispering secrets. The villagers would shut all doors and windows before Maghrib prayers every evening, turn off their lights, and would not step outside again until the dawn call to prayer. Their first night passed in silence, but on the second night, Lestari heard what sounded like a baby crying. She got out of bed, stood by the window, and looked outside. There was nothing, only darkness and a thin mist creeping in from the swamp. But the baby's cry grew clearer, and with it a strange red light appeared, glowing like fire and floating low through the trees, slowly approaching the house. Lestari was frozen in fear. In that red glow she saw a head, a human head. Long hair hung down, and beneath the head dangled internal organs, intestines, liver, dripping blood as it floated. She screamed. Her scream shattered the stillness of the night, and lights flickered on in a few neighboring houses. But when they came outside and saw the light flying up into the sky, no one said a word. The next morning, Pa Muksin came to their house. He spoke slowly. "It was not a dream, Bu Lestari. What you saw was a kuyang. It has caught the scent of your baby's blood." After that night, Lestari could no longer sleep normally. Any noise from outside would jolt her awake, the flapping of wings, the rustling of leaves. Everything felt suspicious. Every evening before sunset, she would lock all the doors and windows, light the incense that Pak Muksin had given her, and place bundles of betel leaves in every corner of the house, just as instructed. But her fear wasn't just about the outside. A few days after the incident, she began to notice something odd in the behavior of a woman, the one who often brought them food. Her name was Imbak Surti. She lived across the road, a childless widow known for helping everyone. But Lestari began to feel that something wasn't quite right. Imbak Surti seemed a bit too kind, and she came by too often. Once, without being asked, she even offered, "Let me massage your belly with a mixture I make myself, so your baby stays healthy and nothing harms it," she said with a smile. That night in bed, Lestari saw something that shouldn't have been there. A small bloodstain, as if something had crept in silently. When Darmawan returned home that night, Lestari told him everything, what she had seen and what she felt. The next morning, with a worried face, Darmawan went to see the village chief, Pak Muksin. His living room smelled of incense, and old talismans hung on the walls. When Darmawan mentioned Umba Surti's name, Pak Muksin slowly nodded. "We've suspected her for a long time," he said in a low voice, "but we never had any proof. She's like one of us during the day," Pak Muksin said, "but at night she's no longer human." Then he showed Darmawan something, a piece of dried buffalo hide wrapped with coarse coconut fiber rope. It was a kind of talisman or protective charm used to protect pregnant women, typically placed around the house or under the bed. "Hang this up tonight," he said firmly, "and don't leave even a crack in the door open. If the Kuyang catches the scent of blood again, it will return." Night fell. The talismans were hung properly. But still, Lestari couldn't shake off her unease. She clutched her growing belly and tried to sleep. But it didn't take long. That sound returned, the horrifying cry of a newborn, as if its chest had been torn open, a child not yet born. Outside the window, that red light returned. This time, in the glow, appeared a pair of reddish eyes, glowing with a monstrous glare. A half-open mouth revealed two sharp fangs. The Kuyang had chosen its prey. That night the air felt different, heavy and suffocating, as if even breathing took effort. Even though all the windows were closed, a cold wind crept into the house. Lestari sat shivering in the middle of the room. Dharmawan was beside her, cold sweat trickling down his forehead, though he tried to stay calm. Outside, the red light spun around their house like fire, playing a twisted game of hide-and-seek, looking for an opening. Suddenly there was a sound from the kitchen, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor, followed by a wet, squishy thud. Dharmawan slowly approached the kitchen, holding a small knife he usually used for gardening. The kitchen was slightly separate from the main part of the house, connected by a narrow wooden corridor. His footsteps were slow but firm, even though inside his heartbeat felt like it was about to explode. The kitchen door was slightly ajar. With trembling hands, he pushed it fully open. And then he saw it. A woman's headless body lay on the kitchen floor. Her clothes were torn, but he immediately recognized the familiar leaf-patterned jarret cloth. It was Imbak Surti's clothing. Scattered around the body were intestines and other internal organs, still dripping with blood. But strangely, there was no smell of rot, only the sharp stench of fresh blood and the acrid smoke of incense. Dharmawan quickly stepped back, shut the door, and locked it. At that moment, he was certain this wasn't an ordinary murder. This was the true form of the Kuyang. At night, this creature detaches its head and internal organs from its body and flies off to hunt for prey. And now that floating head was still out there, drifting through the sky, searching for its target, Lestari and their unborn child. Without saying another word, Dharmawan brought Lestari into the bedroom and told her to stay in bed. Then he took the protective talismans given by Pa Muksin and began placing them in every corner of the room, chanting the prayers he had been taught by the villagers. Outside, the sound of a crying infant changed, turning into the agonized roar of an animal in pain. Then came a metallic clinking sound like wind hitting glass. After that, they heard scratching on the roof. The Kuyang was trying to get in. Lestari covered her ears and, trembling, whispered again and again, "Go away, go away, don't take my baby." And then, as if some invisible force was protecting them, the roar began to fade. The red light disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, Dharmawan opened the kitchen door. The body was gone. Only a bloodstain remained, and in one corner lay a torn piece of jarret cloth. But what shocked them most was this: Imbak Surti was nowhere to be found the entire day. And that night, a strange silence fell across the village. Not a single person stepped outside. The days that followed were filled with tension and fear. Lestari showed clear signs of fatigue. She couldn't sleep, waking often from nightmares, her skin turning pale. Even the baby in her womb seemed restless, kicking more often as if sensing something wasn't right. The villagers remained silent. No one mentioned Imbak Surti's name, as if she had never existed. But everyone began hanging betel leaves and garlic on their windows. When night came, not a single light remained on. The entire village turned into a silent, lightless, ghostly place. Lestari tried to stay strong. But her anxiety didn't fade, especially after the events of that day. That night, while Dharmawan was bathing in the back bathroom, Lestari was sitting in the middle room, staring out the window. Suddenly, her chest tightened, her heart pounding, and then she heard it, a scratching sound on the glass. Small nails, like those of an animal. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward the window. On the other side of the glass, she saw something sliding down, stuck to the pane. At first, it seemed like drops of water, but no. It was a thick, dark, reddish-black liquid. And in the middle of it were two sharp marks, tooth-like indentations, perfectly imprinted on the glass, surrounded by dry blood. Lestari screamed. Dharmawan immediately ran out of the bathroom and rushed to her. He looked at the window and saw the same mark. He tried to wipe it with a cloth, but it wouldn't budge, as if it were fused into the glass. That very night, Dharmawan called Pak Muksin. The village chief arrived with some strange objects, a clay pot containing black liquid, and a bunch of dried reed grass, the ends of which were on fire. He walked around the house, sprinkling the black water onto the soil and plants while chanting ancient verses, words that neither Dharmawan nor Lestari could understand. When the ritual was complete, Pak Muksin said, "It has marked this house." The bite marks on the window meant it had nearly entered, but failed. A Kuyang can never enter if the mother and child are under the protection of talismans and prayers, he warned. But that protection is not permanent. Lestari was crying. She couldn't take it anymore. Her body was worn down, her mind weakened. Every night felt like a battle between life and death. But Dharmawan remained firm. "We're not leaving this village," he said. "Not until our child is safely born." But the next night something even more horrifying happened. A large owl crashed into Lestari's window, shattering the glass. And just before it disappeared into the darkness, they heard a grotesque voice. "I want its blood." It wasn't a human voice, nor an animal's. Something in between, something that shook them to their bones. The next morning, beneath the broken window, they found a long strand of wet hair stuck in the cracked glass. In Teluk Bungkal, the days seemed to be running out, counted down one by one. Lestari was now 9 months pregnant. She had grown weak, and the baby had already dropped earlier than expected. At night, cries echoed from house to house, long howls, and the sound of footsteps on rooftops. Fear had gripped the entire village. People were hanging more talismans than ever before and burning incense constantly. Some even said it outright. Dharmawan should leave the village with his wife. But the only road out of the village had flooded from heavy rain. They were trapped, and the Kuyang knew it. On the night before the child's birth, Lestari writhed in unbearable pain. Labor began unexpectedly. The village midwife couldn't come. Her home had been overrun by a swarm of bats. That's when Pak Muksin called for Makna, an elderly midwife known throughout the village, summoned only in times of dire need. Makna arrived slowly, bringing with her a clay pot filled with flower water, a red thread, and a small copper knife. In a calm but firm voice, she said, "It's already very close. We must finish this quickly." Everyone understood. It meant the Kuyang. Outside, the red light was circling the house, sometimes on the left, then the right, then disappearing into the darkness again. The Kuyang was waiting for the exact moment of the child's birth. Labor began in the darkened room, lit only by a few flickering candles. Lestari's screams shattered the night silence. Makna, chanting sacred verses, worked to help deliver the baby. Suddenly, the electricity went out. The candlelight flickered wildly. The walls of the house seemed to tremble. Something was scratching from outside. Just then, a newborn's cry filled the room, a sharp, piercing wail. At that very moment, the window shattered with a deafening crack. Cold wind rushed into the room, followed by the sound of a deep sigh, a howl of rage and frustration. Makna quickly bathed the baby with the flower water, then wrapped it in a white cloth imbued with protective prayers. Dharmawan stepped toward the window, sprinkling salt with a trembling hand and chanting protective prayers. But no one was prepared for what they saw on the other side of the glass. A severed human head, long hair flowing, eyes glowing red like fire, two sharp fangs dangling at the corners of its mouth. From underneath it hung entrails and a heart, swaying as if still alive. The head floated in front of the window, just a few meters away, twisting like a snake, snarling. Makna suddenly looked toward the window, her eyes wide in horror. That is not just a Kuyang. She has been completely transformed by black magic. If she manages to taste the child's blood, she will also trap its soul. Then, without hesitation, Makna sliced her own index finger, drawing blood. She marked the baby's forehead with it, and softly she whispered a final incantation. Lestari had already fainted, and Dharmawan, he stood trembling, clutching his newborn son tightly to his chest, shaking with a mixture of fear and fierce love. And then, as the call to Fajr prayer echoed faintly from the distance, the monstrous form of the Kuyang leapt into the sky, vanishing with a final howl into the jungle of the wetlands. That night they had survived, but it wasn't over yet. In the morning, the sun rose weakly over Teluk Bungkal, its light shrouded in thick mist. The villagers slowly emerged from their homes, looking up at the sky, as if something still lurking beyond sight was watching them, its shadow felt, though unseen. The story of the Kuyang spread once again. Whispers filled shops, verandas, corners, but no one dared say her name aloud. Lestari remained in bed, her body still weak, but their son was born safely, and he was healthy. Before leaving, Makna gave one last warning. Until the baby's umbilical cord fully dries and falls off, the Kuyang can still smell his blood. Guard this night well. But that night, no threat came. No red light, no crying, no sharp bite marks on the window. The next day, the villagers brought news. A decaying corpse had been found in an old cottage near the marsh, just a few hundred meters from Lestari's house. A woman's body turned blackish, but the most horrifying part, the body had no head. No one dared to touch it, but everyone recognized the pattern on the batik cloth. It was Mbak Surti's. No one claimed any blood relation to the dead woman. Finally, Pa Muksin and a few villagers buried her at the edge of the forest, surrounding the grave with protective bamboo and magical talismans. Since then, the terror of the Kuyang lessened somewhat, but that didn't mean it was over. A few weeks after the child's birth, one night while Lestari was putting her baby to sleep, she suddenly felt there was something under the floor. She didn't dare look that night. But the next morning, while cleaning the house, she found a bundle of long, wet hair stuck between the floorboards. No one could explain how it got there. Dharmawan and Lestari looked at each other and, without a word, burned the hair. After that, they left the village. Dharmawan got a new job in the city. But the trauma of Teluk Bungkol stayed with them forever. Their child is now growing up healthy, but every night Lestari still keeps salt and betel leaves under her pillow, just to be safe. Because in the island of Kalimantan, a Kuyang never truly dies. It only waits for its next prey. This was a chilling, blood-stained tale from Teluk Bungkal, where the line between the real and the unseen is so thin it could shatter at any moment. The terror of the Kuyang is not just the story of a monstrous creature. It is a tale of a mother's courage, a father's unflinching resolve, and a family ready to face every unseen threat to protect what matters most. This incident ends here. Now we will move on to the next incident. This is an event I don't personally remember, but my mother and grandmother told me about it. When I was about 4 years old, I was sleeping next to my mother. That night, my mother had a nightmare where a terrifying-looking dwarf kept saying, "Come with me or I'll kill you." In the dream, my mother kept saying no and running away. The dwarf then threw a rope, wrapped it around her neck, and pulled her down. She felt like she couldn't breathe. It was a terrifying experience. My grandmother, hearing my mother scream in her sleep, rushed into the room. She saw my mother choking herself with her own hands. My grandmother quickly woke her up, and my mother slowly began to calm down. Right then, I suddenly started crying uncontrollably and pointed under a wooden wardrobe, saying, "There's a little man there. He looks really scary. Mom, take him out. He's making a scary face at me." But my mother and grandmother couldn't see anything. My grandmother knew some cleansing and healing rituals, so she performed a spiritual cleansing on my mom and said a prayer. "Let the harm sent to us return threefold to the one who sent it." A few days later, my father, who was living with another woman and a different family at the time, called my mother in a panicked voice. He yelled, "Why are you doing witchcraft on us?" He said his wife had suddenly fallen ill, and they had to call a priest to cleanse their house because their children would scream and cry every night, saying an evil dwarf was in their home. That's when we understood. The witchcraft had actually been done by my father's wife, and the effect had returned to her. She survived later on, but this event still leaves a deep mark on me. I hope you're enjoying the stories. If you liked them, please make sure to hit the like button on the video and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Now we will move on to the next incident in my elder sister's life, and to this day, it remains a mystery for our family. Near the high school I attended, there was a large park called Agena Park. It was usually a typical public park, mothers bringing their kids to play, people jogging along the running path, and high school students like us hanging out and chatting. But behind this ordinary appearance lies a strange truth. The park is quite infamous locally for paranormal events. Every few years, someone ends their life by hanging themselves from one of the big trees in the park. Still, since it was the largest open space near the school, students often gathered there. One summer evening, my sister went to Agena Park with a few close classmates to play with handheld fireworks. The park was a convenient midpoint from everyone's houses, so they decided to meet there. Nighttime outings are always special for teenagers, so they were having a lot of fun. Around 10 p.m., my sister called my mom to come pick her up. My mom set off in the car, taking me and my younger brother with her. Even though our house was the farthest, we were the first to arrive. At the park entrance, we saw my sister chatting with what looked like around 6 of her friends. Boys and girls were standing on both sides of the staircase at the entrance, waving as my sister got into the car. Once in the car, I said to her, "You guys had a big group for the fireworks. I thought it was just the 3 of you." She smiled and replied, "How many people do you think were there?" I said, "Well, I saw 3 on the right side and 3 on the left, so 6 in total." Mom looked surprised and said, "Really?" "I saw 7 or 8. Then my little brother added, "I thought there were about 4. We had all seen a different number of people, at the same time in the same place. In reality, my sister said there were only 3 of them, herself and 2 other girls. There were no boys present. But my mom, my brother, and I, all 3 of us, saw people who weren't actually there. So, who were those extra people? Why did Mom see people that I didn't? And why did I see people my brother didn't? Even today, just thinking about it gives me chills. Perhaps some unseen presence had mingled among us in that park. Give a like to the video, let us know how you felt in the comments, and feel free to share any suggestions. If you have a story you'd like to share with us, please write it down and send it to our email address, ghostsredeye